The Radical. Fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody, welcome. Welcome to Yaron Brook Show. Hope everybody having a great weekend. I think it's a long weekend for many people, at least. Hopefully it is for you, if you like that kind of thing. Yeah, it's not clear to me. Is tomorrow a work day? It's not a work day. For whom? I've got a bunch of meetings scheduled tomorrow. Are people going to stick to those meetings? Are they not? Not a holiday for me. So, but then neither Saturday and Sunday. So every day is a work day in my life. So that's partially because I love my work. All right. Let's see. Today we're talking about critical race theory, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Maybe a little bit of social justice. A couple of things before we get there. Let's see. What did I want to cover? Yes. Yesterday, Kyle Dunleavy. I don't know if you're there, Kyle. Hopefully you are. But yesterday, Kyle asked a $50 question about Anne Applebaum, and like I knew the name, and it was like, God, but I couldn't bring it into exactly the context of who she was. But so I did. I looked her up. So if Kyle's there, I looked Anne up, and I actually talked about one of her articles recently on a Yaron Brook Show. She wrote an excellent article in Atlantic called "The New Puritans," where she talks about the left, the puritanical left, restricting free speech. You have to, the whole woke religion of you can only say certain things, you can only approach things in a certain way, and there's a dogma, and then there's a whole process of punishing you for being outside of that dogma. So Anne Applebaum wrote this excellent article in The Atlantic called "The New Puritans," if you're interested. So Kyle, I like Anne Applebaum. I follow her on Twitter. I've been following her for quite a while. She also writes a lot about Eastern Europe, and in that context, she's writing right now about a lot about Poland, and about this Polish Supreme Court ruling that is kind of opening the door for Poland to leave the EU. I guess this weekend there were demonstrations all over Poland. They were pro-EU, but of course the state media didn't report on them. Very much like the old authoritarian communist days, where the state media report on what they wanted to report, but not actually the news, what actually was going on. She seems to focus quite a bit on Eastern Europe, but also on what is going on in the United States. And it's just a lot of good stuff. She does a lot of what looks like a lot of good stuff. I don't think I'll agree with everything. My guess is she's left of center, but she seems appropriately anti-Trump, appropriately anti-CRT, appropriately anti-woke, appropriately anti the whole nuttiness that's going on right now, and also anti the authoritarian right in Eastern Europe. So if you add all that up together, yes, I think she's good. Poland's not going to save the West. Poland is leading the way towards the collapse of the West. So Poland and Hungary are at the forefront of leading us into oblivion on the West. But that's a whole other show, which we will do soon. I want to do a show on Hungary and the American right's infatuation with Hungary and what Hungary actually represents, and Poland and the complete anti-freedom mentality of the Polish government. Not so much the Polish people, but the Polish government. But the Polish government, I think, is dedicated now to stealing the next election, winning the next election, whether they win it or not. I think everybody's learned from Donald Trump, just that they're going to do it much better than Donald Trump did it. They'll actually get away with it, whereas he did not. But he might next time. I think that's part of the issues. Anyway, Kyle, sorry I didn't have an answer for you yesterday. You did put $50 on it, so it deserves an answer. So we're all good. I would definitely follow Ann Applebaum. Oh wait, let's see. Yes, okay. Want to remind everybody, Allie's not here again today. Not sure what's happening to Allie. She's taking this weekend off, maybe on vacation, maybe just partying of the weekend. Who knows? Polish are strong people. Yeah, I mean, they're very strong people. I mean, these are the strong people who kind of generations ago, not the same Poles as today, but basically, if you're going to make up a collectivistic statement like that, I can do it to save. The same thing. These are the same Polish people that, regularly, kind of, harassed my ancestors, killed many of them, to a large extent cooperated, or to some extent cooperated with the Nazis in eliminating members of my family. So yes, some Poles are strong. I only have 1/4 of my family's from Poland. 3/4 of it are actually from Lithuania, but all from that part of the world. And almost everybody who stayed in Europe, who didn't get out of Europe before the war, was murdered. And of course, many were murdered well before that. So 3/4 of my heritage is Lithuania. Latvia, so a little shtetl, somewhere between Lithuania and Latvia. Not anywhere of significance. Although one of my sides, my ancestors actually founded the Hasidic movements. I'm responsible for all those guys. My family's responsible for all those guys running around in 17th century clothes. All right, already got a thumbs down, probably on my comments on Poland, or maybe on the throwaway comment on Trump. Who knows? But it's always good to know that people are engaged and are ready to verbally criticize my work. Ben Shapiro's from Lithuania too. I wouldn't be surprised. Wouldn't be surprised if we're related, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th cousins or something like that. It's a small world. All right, Ian Mercat has just posted the first super chat question, which I'll get to, of course, later. But let me just remind you then that in spite of the fact that Ali's not here, she's gone partying. I don't know what she's doing this weekend, but she has obviously not been here. Maybe it's me announcing these shows late. I don't know. We still have a $600 goal. Yesterday, we kind of made it barely by at the last minute, kind of really barely. So hopefully we can make it with more spare time today. We're at $18 right now. So there's a lot of work to do. So hopefully you guys can start asking questions. Critical race theory is the topic of the day. So just any questions you have about it, or about anything else at all. Ian Mercat has already asked something unrelated to critical race theory. And I'll get to it after we start the discussion. But yes, this is how we fund the show. This is you showing support, but this is you also asking questions. So feel free to jump in. I know many of you cannot afford $20 or $50, so feel free at $5, $2, $1, whatever it takes. But let's try to let's try to get the appropriate value for value. If we don't start making if we don't make the 600, I'll start questioning the value that you see in these shows. I lose my motivation. That won't be good. All right, Tuesday, just a reminder to everybody, Tuesday I'll be debating Richard Wolff at the University of Pennsylvania. It's live. I don't know if they'll be streaming it. Richard Wolff is actually not going to be there live. He's going to be on Zoom, so I don't know if they're going to be able to stream the whole thing. I'm hoping that it's all going to be taped. I'm counting on it being taped, but I'm excited. I'm excited opportunity to debate him. I just watched a couple of his debates this afternoon, just kind of as prep. Yeah, I mean, nothing new. He's a particularly articulate, passionate, but he's same old. It's the same standard argument that what I call the new socialists make. And I think I'm ready for them, so we will see. But I'm also going to defend capitalism in a very, very different way than anybody else who I've watched debate him has defended it. So we will see. Most people just attack socialism. Oh, we're a little bit better. Capitalism, is not that great, and capitalism today is not that great, and there is cronyism. And nobody really defended laissez-faire capitalism. Nobody really defended it as a moral principle. And that is a big part of what I plan to do. Oh, we got 2 thumbs down. Wow. I mean, it doesn't take long for you guys for the hate to come out. All right, but we're at 53 thumbs up, so thank you. Don't forget to give a thumbs up before you leave if you like the show. Don't forget to become a monthly supporter of the Yaron Brook Show. You can do so on Patreon, on Subscribestar, and yaronbrookshow.com/support. And you can, locals as well. All right. And of course, if you're not a subscriber, then please subscribe. If you don't watch this show live, then please become a monthly supporter on one of those services. All right, enough of all that. Critical race theory. So we've talked about critical race theory many times. I don't want to have to repeat myself. I think Action Jackson was putting up a critical race theory playlist of all the stuff I've done. Whoa, Shazbot. I still owe you a review, and you're already jumping in with one. Who else do I owe a review to? I think I only owe Shazbot the review of the Star Trek episode. But movie Paul Blett. Okay, I will check this out. I'll check this out. I'm not sure. I know this. All right, but yes, you can have me review a movie. Shazbot is getting a discount because he does so many of these. Typically, it's $500, but I see he's only put $400. But that's okay because he does so many of these. He's earned a discount for movie reviews. So I will be doing that. But thank you. That'll get us to the $600 very, very quickly. I think we should, given what Shazbot just did, why is that doing that? I think we should raise the goal to $1,000 just because of the $400 that Shazbot just dropped on the movie review. So sorry guys, $1,000 is the new goal. All right. I've done a lot of critical race theory. We're going to create a playlist of all the stuff on anti-racism and critical race theory. They'll all go into one playlist. You'll be able to get it all there. I don't want to have to repeat all the stuff that I've done, although I'm sure I will repeat it. But an article by Ayan Hirsi Ali caught my eye, and it's another excuse to talk about this. And I know there's nothing you guys like more than bashing the left and going after critical race theory, although there seems to be a bunch of people doing a really, really good job of this. I'm not sure you need that much more from me on this. But I thought Ayan Hirsi Ali's article was interesting. Oh, he was kidding. All right. So we've got 3 different movies. 3 different movies now that he wants me to review. One of these 3, I get to choose. All right. It's I've got it. I've got them all down. I will look at it and get back to you. But I do remember that I owe you the Star Trek. Anybody else there that I owe a movie review to, remind me, and I'll do it. I do owe you guys 2 shows. I owe John a show, and I own Troy a show, Troy from Australia a show, and I will get to them. I apologize, but probably next weekend I'll get to those 2 shows. All right. So Ayan Hirsi Ali wrote an article. Ayan Hirsi Ali is, of course, the heroic Somalian woman who escaped Somalia, escaped her Muslim parents trying to arrange a marriage for her, escaped Islam, escaped to the Netherlands, became a real powerhouse in the Netherlands, a real intellectual, a real voice against Islam, particularly the jihadi Islam, the way they treat women, and just more generally, her life was threatened. Her collaborator on a project about Islam was murdered, and she was refused security by the Netherlands Parliament, even though she at the time, I mean, this is a young girl who escaped Somalia with nothing. She became a member of Parliament in the Netherlands, and then she was not given any security. Not given any security, in spite of the fact that her life was being threatened, and one of her collaborators had just been murdered, and they still ignored her request for security. As a consequence, she landed up coming to the United States. She today lives in the United States. I think she's a fellow or senior fellow. What is she? Research fellow at Stanford University. She landed up marrying one of the leading conservative intellectuals in the United States, a Brit by the name of, somebody will remind me his name because I forgot. Anyway, she is a powerhouse. I have an enormous amount of respect for her. I don't always agree with her. And you know, I think she has the wrong view of history. I think she's way too conservative. She doesn't have enough respect for Ayn Rand. But she is on the right side of history. And she wrote this article about the fact that the left is trying to rebrand the CRT, that critical race theory has become toxic. It's criticized by everybody. Nobody wants to touch it. So they're trying to say, oh, no, we don't stand for critical race theory. That's a whole academic theory. We're not interested in that academic kind of abstract stuff. We're interested in concrete kind of application in reality. And what really we're interested in, they say, is this, what is now being abbreviated as DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're not about critical race theory. We're really interested about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And please don't mix us up with what, I don't know, the academic world that Derek Bell and Kimberly Crenshaw and other CRT architects do. We do diversity training. We're Ibram Kendi, who I did a whole show about a while back, and Robin DiAngelo, who I did a whole show about a while back. I did a whole show on Ibram, and did a whole show on Robin. So I'm not going to repeat them, but we're about diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're not about critical race theory. That's just academic stuff. And what we want fundamentally is to bring equity to American life. Equity. Now, what does equity mean? Well, equity means, they tell us, equity means justice. Well, but in this context, what do you mean by justice? Well, what we mean is equality. What we mean is non-discrimination. What we mean is diversity. We just want, we're told, inclusion. We just want diversity. We just want justice. How do you know if you've achieved justice or not? Well, I mean, one major criteria of that is if there is inequality of outcome between populations, well, there's obviously an issue of justice there. There's obviously some discrimination. There's obviously some systemic racism. What we need is equality of outcomes. And they don't talk about equality of outcomes vis-a-vis individuals as much, although some of them do, and to a large, ultimately it reverberates down to the individual level. To a large extent, they're interested in equality between groups, between people of different skin color, between different people of different ethnic background, between people of different educational backgrounds. So outcomes should be the same. I mean, there's no difference, they tell us, supposedly, between blacks and whites. So if they are not succeeding to the same extent, then there must be something unjust about the system. About the system. The one thing that CRT and DEI try to avoid doing, and when you listen to Kendi and D'Angelo, you'll see this, is they try to avoid individual cases, the individual, unless it's to guilt the individual into a particular position, unless it's to shame an individual into a particular position. But most of their analysis is about groups. Inequality is a sign of systemic problems. In their mind, usually systemic racism, if the differences between the groups, if the groups are defined by race, systemic racism. And how do we know it's systemic? Because we know that we can't find any particular individual who's a racist. We can't find any particular action that's a racist. It must be in the system. We cannot, of course, argue that maybe there are cultural differences between the groups that might cause these differences. There might be long-standing problems, again, cultural or otherwise, that are causing these problems. They might be historic, but they're not systemic. That is not acceptable. The very fact that there are differences, the very fact that the outcome is different, warrants the conclusion in their mind that there's something systemic, something sneaky, something evil, something bad going on. The whole CRT, the whole DEI apparatus is built around shifting away from the idea of justice in the sense of getting what you deserve, merit, achievement, grades, raises based on productivity, getting away from the idea of merit, the idea of desert based on merit, in favor of an equality of outcome methodology. If some students are getting A's and other students are getting C's, something's wrong with the system. Everybody should be the same. There are no inherent differences between people. There are no inherent differences between cultures. All there is racism and obstruction and systemic discrimination. Yep. So what we need, of course, is to create equality. Now, the problem, the problem with all of this is, or the reason this says that the critical race theory and DEI have any credibility out there, have anybody stopping and listening to, is the history of racism in the United States. The fact that for decades, not that long ago, there was indeed systemic racism in the United States. There was systemic racism. In some places, there was systemic anti-Semitism. There was clearly an attempt to segregate, to penalize, and to differentiate between people based on color of skin, between people based on ethnic background. And indeed, the black community in America has had so much racism in the past that its starting point is behind many other communities, because they haven't built up the capital, whether that capital is financial capital, or they haven't built up education. They certainly haven't built up a culture of achievement, whether educational achievement or other forms of achievement. The culture is not there. And part of that is a consequence of the fact that of slavery and a consequence of Jim Crow laws. But Jim Crow laws are long gone. It's been over 50 years. It's almost 60 years. And the Civil Rights Bill, unfortunately, made a huge mistake. And the mistake was to approve of state-forced lack of discrimination. That is, make it so that even private citizens in their own businesses couldn't discriminate. That was a huge mistake. The state now took over the responsibility of telling us what was fair, what was just, what you could and couldn't do on your property, which I think created resentment. And then, of course, and I did a whole show about this, the state created the whole idea of affirmative action and all the consequences that affirmative action have had. Now, in spite of the fact there were over 50 years since Jim Crow laws are gone, and the Civil Rights Act and affirmative action, it's still true that fewer blacks get bachelor's degrees, 10% lower than the national average. 26% of blacks get bachelor's degrees, which is 10% lower than the national average. More than half of black households earn less than $50,000 annually. And the labor force participation rate for black men is 3.3% lower than for white men. And it's actually shrunk by 11.6% since the early 1970s. Only 4 CEOs of Fortune 500 companies are black. So you look at that and you say, why is that? Why are blacks doing so poorly in America? And if you're not allowed to question affirmative action, because affirmative action should be helping them, if you're not allowed to question the welfare state, which I think is a major cause of that has held back black families, black culture, then what people are left with is racism. But there's no proof of the racism. These people never provide the proof of racism other than these outcomes. But I would argue that black poverty rates were declining much faster before the welfare state than after the welfare state. That maybe the welfare state has something to do with this. Maybe the incentivization to have, single-family homes. Maybe there are other structural issues within the black community. For example, the distrust today among black students of successful students. There's a culture of calling them white because they study hard, they get good grades. It can't help. That can help create a culture of success within the educational establishment if you put down your best students. Harrison says, hang in there, I can be one of your whales soon. Looking forward, Harrison, looking forward to it. And instead of looking at the leadership the black communities had, leadership that since Martin Luther King died, I think has betrayed them over and over and over again. All those old civil rights leaders, I mean, good for them for fighting the good fight during the civil rights era. But since then, what have you done? I would argue, betrayed your communities by creating a grievance culture, which is what CRT and DEI are. We're not succeeding because of you. We're great. We're doing everything right. We have a wonderful culture. To the extent that we don't, it's your fault. Who is you? Oh, whites. Yes, it's true that white people, hundreds of years ago, enslaved blacks. It's true that some white people's grandparents were responsible for Jim Crow laws in the South. But the fact is that nobody white today, alive today, owned slaves. And 99.9999% of people who happen to have white skin alive today reject slavery, think slavery is an abomination. And yet, their grievances, it's your fault, you white students over there. Why? By what standard? Why not take responsibility? Why not focus on ways to lift up black students, to find the things that are holding them back, by giving them not a victim complex, not a grievance, not it's everybody else's fault, but giving them agency, treating them as adults, treating them as responsible adults, adults with ability and choices. Why not teach them and encourage them to believe in a system that they can shape through their choices, through their ability, through their hard work? The students are being taught that no, they have no agency. To the extent that they succeed, it's the system. To the extent that they fail, it's the system. Not their effort, not their ability, not them taking personal responsibility, not their agency. They're being taught that they are nothing, that they are automatons, that they don't matter, that the system is all. Systemic racism or systemic privilege. And it's those other people who happen to be white, who have all the power. They control everything. And it's them who will determine your fate, which is BS. I mean, we're seeing today in American schools, we're seeing the unthinkable just a few years ago. Literally physical segregation. Segregated sessions where whites only, blacks only. Classes where all the blacks are funneled into particular classes so that the other classes are all white. All done supposedly in the name of addressing systemic racism. All done, right? This promotion of racism in the name of curing us from racism. So where we're heading is what Ian Hersey Ali refers to as neo-segregation. And we're seeing this all over American schools right now. You're seeing now parents object to the teaching of CRT, and then, you know, people going out, oh, we don't teach CRT. We're just interested in equity. But that's exactly what equity means. Equity means systemic racism causes inequality, and what we need to do is engaged in massive racism in order to solve it. Whether you want to call it critical race theory or not, who cares? It's the same. grievance attitude. It's the same attitude that views individuals not as individuals, but views them as member of races, that views them as having no agency over their own life, no real free will, they're determined by their race. And therefore, they're not responsible. It's somebody else's fault if they fail. And whatever success anybody gets is a consequence of the system. It's a consequence of, what do they call it? Privilege. Privilege. Nobody ever achieves anything by themselves, for themselves. That's so old-fashioned, believing in you can build it. So what we're doing today in classrooms all over America is demonizing white students, resegregating black students, and all that's going to do is divide us more, increase the hatred, increase the resentment, increase racism. In a Virginia Department of Education webinar on equity, right? There's no mention, there's no talk of empowering or helping individual black children, Ian Hersey Lee writes. The conversations revolved around, quote, personal reflection and doing the work with little explanation of what this means in real life. Well, we know what it means. Personal reflection is identifying your guilt, identifying your, what do you call it, your privilege. There was no mention of tutoring, mentoring, or guiding struggling students, or holding them up to high standards, challenging them, maybe improving the school system so it actually challenges kids more broadly. Critical race theory in all its guises, anti-racism in all its modern guises. And I consider myself the ultimate anti-racist, but anti-racism as what's his name, Ibram Kendi would have it, is racism, as is Robin DiAngelo. These are the modern racists. These are the neo-racist, neo-segregationist, well, not so neo, just plain old collectivists. The solution to whatever racism still exists out there, and the solution to struggling students, whatever skin color they might have, has always been the same. It's individualism. Treating kids as individuals. Treating their individual circumstances, and as a school trying to help them overcome those circumstances. Teaching them content, but also teaching them, in a sense, a set of morals that entail taking personal responsibility, studying, allowing kids to fail. Because failure is how you learn. Even in school, failure is a good thing. I certainly failed in 11th grade in advanced math. I was like in advanced math section. I finished that year with a 5 out of 10, basically a failing grade. The teacher didn't want quite to fail me, so she gave me the lowest passing grade she could, which was a 6. A 6. Now, yeah, I mean, I'd spent a lot of time at the beach that year. I'd not spent much studying that year. And I have to say, the teacher wasn't that good, I didn't think. But anyway, I always thought I was good in math, and here I was. I failed. Now, in Israel, you get in those days at least, you got a grade from the class, and then you do a matriculation exam. And the average of those two is your final exam in your course, which is then used in your college application. And you do that in 11th grade and in 12th grade. And anyway, I went and did, so I learned from failing that I better study. I spent days, weeks studying for the exam. The exam is a standardized exam that every 11th grader in advanced math takes, right? And I aced it. I got a 10, which is very rare. So my average landed up being an 8. I landed up with an 8 average. The next day I got a 7 from her and a 9 on the final test. And I averaged in math an 8 overall. Enough to get me into civil engineering. Probably not enough to have gotten me into computer engineering at the time, computer sciences, but I wasn't that interested for whatever reason. I should have been. That should have been my career, right? Anyway, failure is important. Yeah, somebody says you fail when you work out. Yeah. You want to push those muscles to the edge. And the failure represents the edge. It means you've really, 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 really worked out. You want to, in physical exercise, work to the edge. You want to fail. Kids need to be dealt with as individuals, as responsible individuals, as capable individuals, as in prep for adulthood, where they will be responsible for their lives. And you do that by treating them as human beings with free will, with ability. So, CRT destroys that. And I wouldn't be surprised if in 10, 20 years, the situation among black Americans is worse than it is today. Not because of systemic racism, but because of what CRT is teaching. And of course, the damage that's being done is not just, it would be enough if it was done on black Americans, because it's massively damaging to them. But the damage is also to white Americans. The damaging is just to kids. Kids are going to school being taught that they're either privileged, and therefore they're set for life, whatever they do, which is nonsense. And they should feel guilty for that privilege, for life, because the guilt comes with the color of the skin, not because of any action they took, because they're just kids. What action did they took? They should feel guilty before they've taken any action, because they happen to have a skin color. And blacks should feel victimized, not because they are, some of them are, and there is racism out there, no question there is, but not because of actual incidents of racism, but because of their skin color. That's it, that's enough. And you're creating a whole generation that is splitting itself up between victims and guilty people. And they all know in advance, and you can identify them by the skin color and who they are, what they've done, what they think, what they do. As individuals, doesn't matter. Now, that is a sick, destructive, horrific, unimaginable world. It's much worse than socialism. This is true nihilism. This is true destruction for the sake of destruction. This is nothingness. It's destroying individual lives on both sides. It destroys the lives of the black kids who are not motivated to succeed because they've been told they can't, because there's a system that stops them, and that they're owed stuff, and they need to be given stuff, that all these other people are privileged and are systemically working against them, and they need you create this entitlement, grievance, victimhood mentality. That's not good for anybody. And on the other side, you create this guilt. You can never be happy, because it's not like you, as D'Angelo, that crazy woman. I mean, like she says, it's not like there's anything you can do to stop it. You are racist whether you know it or not. You're racist whether you acknowledge it or not. You are part of the problem, whether you want to be or not. The only way you can avoid it is by groveling, by submitting yourself to whatever, to high taxes, and to giving up your job for somebody less qualified, to not sending your kids to Ivy League schools, to whatever you can do to destroy your own ability and your kids' ability. That's the only way you can overcome the systemic racism. And it's destructive. It makes your own happiness impossible. Makes your kids' happiness impossible. Frank says, waste of time when time is crucial. Time is everything you have. All you have is time. And it's limited. It's finite. It's over. You get it wasted on unearned guilt, unjustified guilt. This is original sin on steroids in the modern world. A new religion. But they all have the same characteristics of religion. They all of them, leverage altruism. They leverage the idea from Christianity that you should feel guilty for your success. You should feel guilty for your achievement. You should feel guilty for your virtues. That you owe it to society. That you owe others. That the whole point of living is to serve and to live for others. They leverage that. Without Christianity, none of this would be possible. Unbelievably destructive. Just a couple of, quick examples of how this is playing out. This is at universities. So two articles. Now, I've recommended this before. I'll recommend it again. I hope you guys do something about it. But I recommend signing up for Barry Weiss's Substack. It's called Common Sense with Barry Weiss. If you're interested in CRT, if you're interested in equity, if you're interested in what's going on in the world around us, she is the person that keeps track of it, that publishes it, and this is two examples. These are two university professors, each with a different story, but the same basic thrust of the struggle that you face. The first one is Gordon Klein, who teaches at the Anderson School of Business at UCLA. During last summer, he got an email from a student saying, he should grade his black, so this is from a white student, a non-black student at least, that he should grade his black classmates with greater leniency than others in the class. To quote the email, we are writing to express our tremendous concern about the impact of this final exam and project will have on the mental and physical health of our black classmates. The unjust murder of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd, the life-threatening actions of Amy Cooper, and the violence conducted of the University of California Police Department have led to fear and anxiety, which is further compounded by the disproportionate effect of COVID-19 on the black community. As we approach finals week, we recognize that these conditions place black students at an unfair academic disadvantage due to the traumatic circumstances out of their control. So he requested that a final be a no-harm exam, that it could only boost the one grades, it couldn't hurt the grade. The email continues, this is not a joint effort to get finals canceled for non-black students, but rather an ask that you exercise compassion and leniency with black students in our major. Now, this is a pure racism. Black students can't cope. They don't have the mental fortitude to cope with problems out there. I mean, students have problems all the time. There's all kinds of stuff going on. But an exam is an exam. Individual students might be able to go and say, look, I've got this trauma going on right now, and maybe get a pass, or maybe get an extension, or maybe get something. But this is treating black students as a monolith and claiming that they're not capable of withstanding the stress that's involved. Now, this professor was not going to have any of this, right? He says, as he says, I welcome, I celebrate a diversity of opinions and arguments. And to say the least, I believe in making room for anyone with the grades and gumption to study at one of the nation's most competitive universities. But academia has so corrupted the word diversity today, that today diversity means ideological homogeneity, and inclusion means the exclusion of some from a taxpayer-supported university to favor others deemed more deserving of an educational springboard to prosperity. Right? So he was shocked by the student's email, and this is what he wrote 20 minutes later. He wrote, quote, are there any students that may be of mixed parentage, such as half black, half Asian? What do you suggest I do with respect to them? A full concession or just half? Right, he's calling them on the racism thing. What do you suggest I do with respect to them? That's it. Also, do you have any ideas if any students are from Minneapolis? I assume that they are probably especially devastated as well because of the riots at the time. I'm thinking that a white student from there might possibly be even more devastated by this, especially because some might think that they're racist even if they're not. So he wrapped a reply by citing Martin Luther King's vision of a colorblind world where people are judged solely by the content of their character, making it clear that I had no intention of treating any students differently on the basis of their skin color. Pretty good. Daniel says Yaron is pretty NPR-ish today. Is that a good thing, a bad thing? I don't know what to make of it. I like NPR, so maybe it's a good thing. Well, what do you think happened to this professor? Well, by the evening, students were calling for his job. Soon after, they circulated a petition demanding I be fired. Within a day or two, nearly 20,000 students had signed, without knowing anything about me or taking into account, as far as I could tell, the implications of non-colorblind grading. Think about this. We have to grade based on color of skin. I was attacked for being a white man and woefully racist. And I quote from the article, on June 5th, 3 days after I was first emailed, I was suspended amid a growing online campaign directed at me. It was around that time I started receiving death threats on voicemail and email. One email dated June 11 read, quote, you are typical bigoted, prejudiced, and racist, dirty, filthy, crooked, arrogant, Jew, kike, mother, whatever, mother you know what. Too bad Hitler and the Nazis are not around to give you a much-needed Zyklon B shower. End quote. Whoa. About a week after this whole thing first blew up, there were police officers stationed outside my house. It would take UCLA's threat manager another 10 days to check in with me to make sure I was okay. I mean, the university was freaking out. They didn't know what to do. He continues saying, Anderson administrators were rattled for good reason. But now because of the fact that my life was now being threatened, the problem was Anderson's reputation. It hadn't granted an African-American professor tenure in decades. It had but a handful of tenured Latino professors. Black students make that about 2% of the student body, and men outnumbered women roughly 2 to 1, leading many students to call Anderson the Manderson School of Management. So even though the university administrator made it clear the university would not take any action against me, there was no grounds to do so. The dean took it upon himself. And he basically was worried about the school's reputation and suspended him from teaching without any deliberations, right? Not just suspended, he was banned from campus. Now, this professor sued the university because while since then they brought him back and they've reinstated him and they never charged him with anything and everything's fine, the fact that he was accused of what he's accused, lost a massive consulting income, massive loss of reputation, and he's suing, as he should. the school for acting irresponsibly. Not the students, the school for backing them up in the way they did. This is the fear that this equity nonsense has instilled in people. Another professor, Dorian Abbott, non-political. He is a professor at the Department of Geophysical Sciences at the University of Chicago. But during the summer of 2020, with the street violence all over Chicago, he recorded some short videos in which he argued for the importance of treating each person as, God forbid, an individual worthy of dignity and respect. Giving everyone a fair and equal opportunity when they apply for a position, as well as allowing them to express their opinions openly when you disagree with them. They attempted to cancel him. This was planned and coordinated, but they went after him. There was a group of graduate students. This professor, Abbott, wrote an op-ed in Newsweek where he argued that diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, it violates the ethical and legal principles of equal treatment and treats persons as merely means to an end, giving primacy to a statistic over the individuality of a human being. That's excellent. He proposed instead an alternative framework called merit, fairness, and equality, whereby university applicants are treated as individuals and evaluated through a rigorous and unbiased process based on their merits and qualifications alone. Excellent. So then there was, they kept going after him over and over and over again. At some point, he was chosen to give the Carlson Lecture at MIT, very prestigious lecture, major honor in his field. Annual public talk to a large audience. The topic was climate and the potential for life on other planets. Not exactly a political issue. On September 22nd, a new Twitter mob composed of a group of MIT students, postdocs, and recent alumni demanded that I be uninvited. It worked. He was uninvited. On September 30th, the chairman of the at MIT told me that he would be canceling the Carlson Lecture for the year in order to avoid controversy. Unbelievable. Now, it turns out that he's giving the lecture, but at a different university. He's going to do it at Princeton, where Robbie George, who is a conservative academic, runs the James Madison program in American Ideas and Institutions, and he's going to have him do the lecture there. But still, this is insanity. And we could go on and on and on. And again, if you're interested in these kind of stories, you can follow Barry Weiss. She documents the insanity out there on a daily basis. These are mobs that are not interested in justice, that aren't interested in right versus wrong. It's complete groupthink. It's complete collectivism. The individual matters not. The political statement is everything. But this is where we are, where to defend individualism, to defend the idea of justice as giving people what they deserve based on merit, based on achievement or failure, desert, justice, is considered radical and insane and worthy of being kicked out of university or denied a speech. It's a crazy world out there. Crazy world out there. All right. Let's take a look at where we are. All right, we're gonna shift to Super Chat questions. I'm sure we'll get back to CRT and DEI. There are a million examples of this. But remember, the answer is not to join your own group. The answer is not to create your own tribe. The answer is not collectivism, ever. This is the Polish mistake, the Hungarian mistake, and the American rights mistake the answer to leftist collectivism, the answer to right-wing collectivism, the answer to all collectivism, no matter what it's based on, no matter what it elevates, is individualism. It's the sanctity of individual life. It's the individual's life, his purpose of his life is his own happiness, based on his own judgment, using his own reason, in pursuit of his own life and happiness. That's individualism. That's what it's all about. All this other stuff is just a waste of our time, a waste of our energy, and destructive, fundamentally destructive. All right, we're at $822. 500 of that is Shazbot for the movie. So really at $322, which means there's still $300 more to go to get us to $600 independent of the movie stuff. So we've got $300 to go. $20, $50, $100 questions are all welcome. Whatever you guys choose. But movie reviews should really be separated from the kind of show-based regular fundraising drives, don't you think? Maybe you don't think, I don't know. All right, let's look for some $20 questions. Ian Mirkat asked, how would an objectivist society avoid backsliding? By being committed to a philosophy based on reality, being committed to a philosophy based on objectivism. Now, there is no such thing as an objectivist society. There will be one day a society that is guided by objectivist principles. There will be one day a society where people live by an implicit philosophy that is fundamentally based on. I don't think it'll be objectivism per se. It'll be based on objectivism. I think the fundamental ideas that Ayn Rand has discovered here, the fundamental ideas in her philosophy, are going to be with us forever, and they're going to be the foundations for whatever great future mankind has. The way to avoid it from blacksliding is to be vigilant. Vigilant about those ideas. Vigilant about reason. Vigilant about egoism. Vigilant about freedom. That's all you need. So it's vigilance. It's always been vigilant. It always will be vigilant. We just now have better tools because we have Ayn Rand's philosophy. All right, let me look. I think there were some $50 questions. Let me do, oh yeah, Adam has one. Let me do those first. Much of what some oppose in the name of opposing CRT is quite rational. For example, giving job and university applicants extra points for competence shown by overcoming obstacles, including obstacles created by the history of racism. Your take. I mean, I could imagine some of that being in a university applicant as a student, but then it has to end at some point. We live in a society that, for the most part, certainly at the top universities, is not racist. And if, okay, so maybe accepted into university because you come from a tough neighborhood or a tough environment. But it can be as a job applicant. And it's only if you've truly overcome and you don't blame the racism, you've worked hard and you've shown real competence, real ability, real skill. So it's very difficult to do, and it will be done in only rare cases. And why would it be done just on the basis of race? I mean, it could be, I overcame the loss of my parents, I'm an orphan, or I overcame, I don't know, a traumatic injury that I had when I was young, or whatever. So yeah, there is an essay component of admission where you can express the fact that you've overcome something specific, but that's not what they want. They want the fact that you're black means you overcame racism. No, it doesn't. Doesn't mean you overcame it. doesn't mean you encountered it. So you have to tell a story in your essay on how you overcame a challenge. And one of those challenges could be racism. But there's nothing unique about racism in that perspective. Let's see if there was any other. The 500 Norwegian is, I think, it's more than $20. I think that's right. Why do many Republicans call themselves free marketers even though they are central planners and altruistic? Well, many free marketers are altruistic because they don't realize that by being an altruist, they're undercutting their free market. And so a lot of libertarians who you could argue, yeah, they really are free marketers. They really believe in laissez-faire capitalism are altruists. And they don't understand the extent to which that undermines and undercuts their advocacy, their belief, their support of a free market. Many libertarians in the United States are free marketers, are religious, and embrace the altruism of religion. So now Republicans is different. Republicans want the cachet of being free marketers. They want to think of themselves as, well, I'm for freedom, of course, like the Founding Fathers. I believe in freedom. But you can't touch Medicare. You can't touch, and a little bit of national planning. And hey, the Chinese subsidize, so we should probably subsidize. So they want the cachet of being linked to freedom. But they don't have the courage, the conviction to stand by free markets in reality when it actually comes to making decisions. That's why the Republicans tend to be a better opposition party, where they can yell all they want, free markets, and vote against the Democrats. But as soon as they get power, they give up on the free market stuff and they just pass everything. Regulations, controls, and government spending up the kazoo with no limitations. All right, let's see. Breton writes, I don't think it's a question. Thanks for fighting the good fight, Yaron. I really appreciate your earnest and sincere podcast. I have no questions at the moment. I just enjoy listening. Thank you, Breton. I really appreciate that. Appreciate the support. Michael writes, what made Rand different than other intellectuals is that she wanted the best minds left free to produce without restraint, while most intellectuals want the best minds left free to rule over everyone else without restraint. I don't like that formulation. And I don't like that formulation because it sounds like Eric Weinstein saying, as he did in a discussion we had with Dave Rubin once a long time ago, he said something like, yeah, I mean, really, really smart people, the best minds, they shouldn't be regulated. But everybody else needs to be regulated because they're too stupid to take care of themselves, right? Rand didn't just want the best minds left free. She wanted everybody left free. Indeed, without being left free, we wouldn't know what the best minds are and who they are and what they can do. She was for freedom for everybody, not just for the elite. And yes, she wanted us to be free to produce without restraint, but she wanted everybody to be able to produce without restraint. And in that sense, she's Aristotelian, whereas others are Platonic. They want the best minds to be the Plato's philosopher kings to rule over us, to rule us, to tell us what we can and cannot do, because the rest of us are too ignorant and stupid. Andy asks, does Atlas Shrugged teach that capitalists have a moral duty to refuse giving their best in an immoral society? How can we trade with people in China knowing it provides the communist, even unintentionally? So I do think you have to refuse giving their best to your destroyers. Up to a point, right? I mean, Ayn Rand paid taxes. Ayn Rand worked with businesses that submitted to regulations. The destroyers of American culture were in Washington, D.C., and yet she traded with them. China is on a different level, I agree. How can we trade with people in China? Who's we? Right? I mean, if you don't want to trade with people in China, then don't. Now, up until a few years ago, I was convinced that China was on a path towards greater freedom, greater prosperity, and that prosperity had done its own people a huge amount of good. And that my trading with Chinese was good for the Chinese. It enhanced and increased their ability to live a good life and ultimately resist oppressive government in the future. Now, it turned out I was wrong. It turned out that the oppressive government is coming to China anyway. And yes, I think today it is a real question as an individual, whether you should buy a product from China or not. It's not the job of government to tell you, but you as an individual. And I think to the extent that we can resist, and it can because so much has been moved to China, you shouldn't have to sacrifice, you shouldn't have to give up stuff in order to teach the Chinese a lesson, in order to deprive the Chinese of your dollars. But where there's a choice, where you can, you should not provide it. I won't buy anything from Cuba, for example, because in Cuba, everything goes to the government. I mean, it literally is nothing private. Everything. Every dollar you send to Cuba or you spend there as a tourist goes to the government. So I will not go to Cuba. I will not spend any money. Now, there used to be, and to some extent there still is, a private sector in China where the government didn't go to the government. Taxes in China are lower than they are here. And I support that private sector. And if I know a product is built by Chinese government-owned business, I would not buy it. And as China becomes more authoritarian, I will buy less and less Chinese goods. So yes, I think you have to, but each one of us has to make their own evaluation. You as an individual have to make that evaluation in the context of your life. What does it take? Now, I don't believe that the Chinese, you mentioned communist. I don't believe China's communist. I think China's fascist. It runs a authoritarian mixed economy. But it's not a communist mixed economy, although maybe Xi is moving it more towards communism. We will see. So far, it's still primarily a fascist economy. Michael asks, no, not Michael, we're going to skip, we're going to go to Thomas because we're doing the $20 ones. Have you read the book, The Coddling of the American Mind by Lukianoff and Haidt? They argue that overprotection has a negative effect on university students and that trigger warnings and safe places do more harm than good. Yes, I haven't read the book, but I've read a long essay that they wrote basically with that theme. And I think it's a good theme. But more than that, what they argue is that helicopter parents and risk-averse parents, by coddling their children when they are young, by not letting them go out by themselves, by not letting them get, fall on their knees and get hurt a little bit, by not letting the kids climb and do crazy things that kids do when they're little, they coddle them. And they also, what parents do and the school system does, is it emboldens the kids' emotions while not training their reasons. So they become risk-averse because of the way they're brought up by their parents. And then they're encouraged to feel, to emote, not to think. So anything new, anything upsetting becomes the primary for them because it's an emotion. And they can't handle anything new and risky and strange and dangerous and whatever. I'm not for free-range kids, but I'm for freedom for kids and for letting kids do a lot of stuff free of adult supervision. I'm not sure I actually practiced what I preach in that thing. I was probably too on the safety side, and I regret that. Yeah, Thomas says they speak of the safetyism as a big problem. It is. I didn't grow that way. I grew up, my parents never knew what I did. I used to come home, drop my backpack, say bye, see you at dinner, and used to go. Or maybe I'd sit and do my homework when I did my homework. And then I'd go. And I'd come back for dinner. There were no cell phones. There's no GPS tracking devices. And we'd get into rock fights where we'd throw rocks at each other. We'd play soccer on the street. Our parents knew this because we played in front of the house. But soccer in the streets where we'd have to rush off the street when the cars would come by. We'd go into the woods. We'd start fires, bonfires. The craziest stuff. Craziest stuff. I mean, literally, I used to lead my street's gang versus the gang on the other street. I used to steal my dad's military officer's hat. I used to lead in rock fights. Literally, we'd throw rocks at each other. I mean, we were nuts. We'd climb walls. We'd climb trees. I mean, crazy stuff. I was too safety-oriented about the pandemic? You gotta be kidding me. I don't know anybody who was traveling more and lecturing to unmasked audiences throughout the pandemic, all of last year. So I think quite the opposite. Whoa, okay, a bunch of Super Chat questions are coming in at a pace that's gonna be difficult to answer, but they're all $20. That's the way. If you want to ask a question now, it has to be $20 above because it's late. That's the thing about if you want to ask the low dollar questions, you have to do it early in the night because later in the night we're trying to wrap up, and I'm not going to answer $5 questions. All right, let's do more of the $20 questions. Let's see. Did you hear de Blasio is getting rid of New York City school programs for gifted students because it's too white and Asian? Yes. He calls it segregation. Yes. Generally, the way to achieve equity is to destroy programs for those with ability. The number of premium schools in New York that tend to be dominated by Asian kids that are now getting reoriented, becoming less premium, discriminating against Asians, teachers are leaving. There's a wholesale effort, and it has been for decades, but it's accelerating right now, to destroy all programs for able kids. It's called ableism, right? Discrimination in favor of able kids. So all programs that are for high ability kids are being destroyed, pulled down. New York is leading the way, but it's all over the country. Iron Meerkat asks, my answer to the idea of systemic racism is you're right. Let's melt systemic racism by implementing laissez-faire capitalism. Okay, but you're granting them too much because there is no systemic racism. But yes, the answer is laissez-faire capitalism, but it's not entirely. Imagine having laissez-faire capitalism with some people still being racist. Now, we could possibly argue that laissez-faire capitalism would penalize the racists, and it would provide an incentive not to be racist and all of that. And all of that is absolutely true. But it still would not be a culture I would want to live in, where everybody, in spite of being laissez-faire, is racist. So I don't think you could get laissez-faire if you actually had racism. The solution to racism is individualism. And the only way to apply individualism consistently is laissez-faire capitalism. Michael asks, there seems to be a strong scientific evidence that psychopaths are born without empathy, like schizophrenics, born with physical impairments to the brain. How does this square with Rand's tabula rasa free will assertion? I'd say two things about this. One is, I am not convinced of this strong scientific evidence. Not convinced. We're talking about a scientific establishment in psychology and the neurology part that studies this, who doesn't fundamentally believe in free will. I read this book about psychopaths, and there's no understanding of what free will is. There's no understanding of if there is free will, what it is, and they don't accept that there is free will. So to what extent can I trust that they have any understanding of the sources of somebody being a psychopath, or the source of somebody being a schizophrenic, or any mental disease? Now, that is not to say that some of these things cannot be physical. That is, sure, you could imagine something wrong with your brain that overrides your free will. And people have this all the time. I mean, people who feel anxiety in spite of their free will, in spite of their ideas, in spite of everything else. There's something overriding, and you can cure that with chemicals. Depression, other things. So there can be malfunction where the brain is emitting a chemical unjustifiably in contradiction to the state of your consciousness, in terms of your chosen state, the consciousness that you molded through your choices. But we don't know enough about how it works. And in any case, that is not a contradiction of tabula rasa. Tabula rasa doesn't say we're born without chemicals. It doesn't say we're born without physical impacts. It doesn't say we're born without a physical structure. We are. And if that physical structure malfunctions, then there are going to be malfunctions that might even override your capacity to choose in certain circumstances. So you have to understand what tabula rasa means. Tabula rasa doesn't mean with no identity. Tabula rasa doesn't mean with no physical there stuff. It means that given the brain, call the brain the physical stuff, you have choices within the scope your brain, in a sense, and reality allows you to have choices. You can't, for example, will things to happen independent of reality, independent of your actions in reality. A lot of things, free will is not whatever. And it's, again, limited by the nature of reality. It's limited by, it has a particular nature, and that particular nature relies on a brain with a particular structure. What you don't have is ideas. And therefore you don't have emotions, because emotions are consequences of ideas, of conclusions, of decisions you make. You have sensations. You have, you have sensations, and you might have other things, right? I'm not going to make a catalog here off the top of my head. But what you don't have is ideas and the conclusions for those ideas programmed into you. That's what you don't have. Okay, Michael asked again with $20. If the nihilistic left is so ineffectual at taking power, how come every coastal city is run by radical leftist mayors? How come the left has been winning for over 100 years? Maybe they're not as incompetent as you think. Well, think about it. So de Blasio is a radical leftist, right? He won. Did he destroy New York? Did he implement his radical, crazy ideas in New York? No, he made New York worse. But did he make it worse than it was in the 70s? No. Did he make it worse than Democrats and Republicans made it a long, long time ago? No. Did he actually implement all these crazy ideas? No. And now that there's an election, have New Yorkers had enough of a relatively radical leftist mayor? Yeah. The new mayor of New York supposedly is a centrist Democrat. And if the Republicans had run a decent person, a well-known person, he might have won in New York. Look at Massachusetts, which has a Republican governor, in spite of the fact that Massachusetts is about as left as you can get, right? But they're not crazy left. They're not nihilistic left. Or take Newsom in California. Newsom is not, he's bad. He's destructive. He's doing bad things, and California is going to suffer from them. But is he at the level of the thugs in the streets, and at the level of Antifa, and at the level of the CRT people? Is that how he governs? No, he can't. He wouldn't survive a day. He wouldn't have survived the attempt to kick him out recently. He governs center-left, so leftists who get into office and survive are people who govern from the center-left. The only place that that has been wacky left is Portland. And yeah, you know, and Portland is suffering. And even there, you know, I don't know. I have some listeners in Portland. You tell me how bad things are now. You know, things are, for the most part, last I heard, most of the demonstrations are over. It's still true that Antifa and right-wing guys have it out on the weekends in Portland, in certain parks. You stay away from those. But if they implemented their nihilistic policies, if they drove all small businesses out, if they drove taxes to 90%, if they wouldn't allow any building locally, if they did the things that the nihilistic left believes in, they wouldn't get reelected and they wouldn't have any power and they'd be finished. My point is that people were against it. Now, it's true that in small localities like maybe Portland, Oregon, it can survive for longer. But it can't survive on a large scale. People rebel against it. People will not tolerate the insanity that a truly nihilistic left in power would bring about. Again, nothing I'm saying doesn't suggest the left can't win, that the left is not destructive. They do win and they are destructive. It's just that the nihilists, the D2s in Leonard Peikoff's script, can't sustain their victories. They will be replaced by D1s or M1s or ultimately an M2 if they survive for long enough. And it's not like they won't be around for a while. They might be around for a while. But it's not a sustaining equilibrium. It's not a sustainable society. An M2 has to arise to take them over. And that M2 might be communism, but I think in the United States of America, that is unlikely. Very unlikely. Bree says, they destroy children's hope for the future through CRT. Absolutely. Climate and sexuality. We should focus on the harm they do to children, not each other. I think people can understand it is bad telling kids they have no future. Yeah, I think that's right. But of course, if people believe that they truly do not have a future, like climate, then they support this. Right? So, but yes, the damage to children, CRT, climate, and sexuality are three big ways in which they are undermining and undercutting the future of kids, no matter what race they are, no matter what ethnicity they are, no matter where they come from. John writes, thank you for recommending Barry Weiss. I really enjoy writing. Good, I'm glad. I mean, she deserves the support. I hope some of you give her money because I think they really do. She really does deserve support. I mean, there are others I mentioned over time that I think deserve support as well. And please follow them and support them because the Substack community generally is very, very good. Ali Al-Raha. I'm mispronouncing that, I know. Sorry, Ali. Why the big corporate founder and leader support Democratic Party even they want to enforce more tax and more regulation, Jeff Bezos, for example? Well, I don't know that Jeff Bezos really supports the Democratic Party. I mean, rumors had it for many years that Jeff Bezos philosophically was a libertarian, was a free market type. What Jeff Bezos and many people in Silicon Valley are is they anti-Republican. They certainly were anti-Bush. And Jeff Bezos have lots of reasons to be anti-Bush because Bush was so anti-Amazon and so anti-Jeff Bezos personally. But I've said this many, many, many times. Silicon Valley will never support Republicans as long as the Republicans don't think evolution is real. It's not that they're huge supporters of the Democratic Party as much as they reject the Republicans and as much as they reject religion as the standard. Now, the other reason is that Many of the founders and many of the leaders, in Silicon Valley, for example, of corporate America, are intelligent people who went to universities, who read a lot of books, who take ideas seriously. And the fact is, most of the ideas are ideas of the left. And then they're guilted into the idea of they should pay more taxes. They support paying more taxes because they feel guilty for their success, which is the contribution of Christianity and secularized Christianity to the whole debate. So wealthy people like Jeff Bezos feel guilt for their success and therefore are willing to pay taxes. Some of them think paying taxes is to buy off the lower classes so they won't rebel against them and bring out the guillotines. That's also a consideration for some rich people. It's a combination of guilt and their perception of, self-defense, but it's ridiculous. And if I'm going to pay more taxes, everybody should pay more taxes, is their logic. But it's philosophy. Look, people are shaped by ideas, not by economics. People vote to increase their own taxes all the time. People do not pursue their economic self-interest. They pursue what they think is moral, just, right, good. Ali asked, does objectivism assume all humans are rational and they can apply reason when they take decisions? Objectivism assumes that all human beings are capable of being rational, that that's what makes them human beings, that the defining characteristic of a human being is their rational faculty. But it needs to be deployed. It needs to be applied. Effort needs to be exerted to be rational. It's not automatic. It's not effortless. It's not just there. So objectivism assumes that every human being has the capacity to apply reason when they make a decision. Doesn't mean they all do. People are very selective. Obviously, they do sometimes. They do when driving their cars out there. Most people do when they're at their job. They don't in politics. They don't often in their personal lives. They don't in many ways. But the point is that they can. Frank asked, thank you, Frank, $50. That's very generous, getting us very close to our goal. Is perceptual pleasure and logical success an indicator of profitable values? Thanks, Yaron. You can have perceptual pleasure if it's momentary without a profitable value. So you could take a drug, for example, that'll give you pleasure, that you will feel, get the sensation of pleasure. It's not sustainable. And it's, in a sense, not real in a sense of consequences of your actions. So I wouldn't quite put it as perceptual pleasure, logical success as indicators of profitable values. I'd say prolonged happiness that involves perceptual pleasure, not limited to perceptual pleasure, and perceptual pleasure, I'd say non-sacrificial perceptual pleasure. And logical success, rational success, I think is rational success. You could say even rational pleasure. You could say pro-life pleasure and logical success are indicators of profitable values, yes. Profitable values, another way to say it is, profitable values should give you pleasure and a sense of success, attaining profitable values. Hopefully I answered your question, Frank. All right, we've got a bunch of $5 and $10 questions, so let's jump into them, try to do them quickly. So what's going to happen in 20 years? We'll be living under a quasi-dictatorship. 30 years after that, objectivist ideas will start having political influence. Is this your prediction? Yeah, I think that's reasonable. I think we're definitely going to go to quasi-dictatorship and then have a renaissance. And the renaissance, I think, will be led by ideas strongly influenced by objectivism. Why are human beings capable of having emotions that go against reality? You'd think evolution would have weeded something like that out. That's exactly the point. We're not born with emotions. Emotions are just responses to conclusions. This is the beauty of evolution, in my view. So this is me speculating. This is not objectivism. Evolution has basically wiped out the need to have all this programming. And it basically has, I mean, I'm talking about it as if it has a purpose, but it doesn't have a purpose. It just is, right? It's a law of reality. It's basically come up with this notion of reason, will, free will, to replace all that programming. And it's because that allows for huge scope in terms of survival of the species and success of the species. Because so much is then possible. Because you're not just coding for a thing, you're coded for everything.
Here's what I found.
Oh, Siri, shut up. And part of that is that you have an emotional mechanism based on pain, pleasure, based on threat, not threat, based on the rewards for good and warning signals from bad. But what is good and what is bad is now your choice, because the emotions are not programmed anymore. The emotions are responses to your thinking, to your conclusions. But this is, if there was a God, this would be genius of God. But this is, in a sense, genius of evolution. To create something like this, a self-programming biological entity. And therefore, evolution just gives you the hardware to make emotions possible. The physical structures, the hormones, all of that, the receptors to make them possible. It doesn't tell you what emotion to have when. That is your reason, ultimately. The conclusions you come to that dictate that. Other than some basic, very, very fundamental, basic sensations that have, and you know, and maybe some very, very basic, it's not emotions, yeah, sensations, I think is the right thing. The sensation of hunger, the sensation of cold, the sensation of missing something, of knowing that something's missing, but not, you know, and babies cry about these things all the time. But then they're not having emotions in the same sense. Thank you, Bonnie. I appreciate that. Daniel says, Christopher and I and Hirsi Ali were good friends. Yeah, I'm not surprised. Corey says, in other words, they're the type who can't see the trees for the forest. That's right. The opposite of the mentality, you cannot see the forest from the trees. Yes. Can see the trees for the forest is people who live in the abstract world. Can't see individuals, they can just see abstractions, they can just see theory. It's more of a Platonic view. The empiricist can only see trees. The disintegration is the trees. The misintegration is only a forest, no specific trees. Completely disintegrated, just trees. No principles, nothing to bind them together. All right, Andre, Yaron, is there an objectivist community in Boston? I'm a student from Italy, just arrived in the U.S., would love to meet some objectivists here. I'm sure there is. I haven't been in Boston in a long time, but, I don't know, look up, right now because of COVID, it's hard to tell, but look up on meetup groups. You might want to write to the Ironman Institute. Maybe they know somebody. Yeah, I mean, figure it out. It's let me just see something here. Sorry. So yes, so figure out. You're gonna have to figure out who they are, but there definitely should be a community in Boston. Does anyone know what cigarettes Ayn Rand smokes? I don't know. Michael asks, is it heroic to work a job you hate in order to support your family, or is that pure altruism through and through? No, not necessarily pure altruism. I mean, you've got a chosen family. By having a family, by choosing to have a family, you have committed to supporting them. Sometimes that might involve doing a job that you hate, but it's not heroic it's heroic to support your family. It's not heroic to do a job you hate. Find a job you don't hate. The world is still full of options. Don't succumb to, this is the only thing I can do. Is San Francisco a failed state? I've never seen so many homeless people in my life in a developed country. This is ominous for the West is sliding into the abyss. It is, in some senses, failed. In other senses, it's thriving. I mean, real estate prices still going up in San Francisco. There's still startups there. There's still companies being created. There's still a lot of economic activity in the city. The city still raises huge amounts of tax revenue. It's this bizarre mixture, maybe indicating the fall is coming, of a lot of success, vitality, engagement with homelessness everywhere and things falling apart and a school system that's completely corrupt and decrepit. It's this weird combination. And it's very easy to just look at a few indicators and say, oh, the world's coming to an end. It doesn't work that way. Things always seem to last longer than you'd expect. Frank asks, recall Inherit the Wind. The reaction against CRT reminds me of the response against evolution a century ago, which is now accepted in most schools. Yeah. Yes. But I'm not sure it's the same. The difference is this. CRT is false. Evolution is true. That's why I don't think CRT will become the dogma in all of our schools. Some schools certainly, but it won't be universal because it's false. So truth matters, even in the world we live in today. Einstein's family called him a dunce. Darwin was a lousy student. Everyone should be free to invent the fields in which they are a genius. I like that. That's great. Travis, when I did my study abroad program in France and Japan, I was called the most adventurous student for both. So I love hearing your stories as a kid. Yeah, I mean, I can imagine, particularly Japan, which I think is a much more protective society. Sandeep, what's your opinion on Thomas Sowell? What you agree and disagree with Mr. Sowell? I mean, I agree with a lot of things Sowell has written there. I think his analysis of poverty, his analysis of race, much of it I agree with. I disagree with his religion. I disagree with his altruism. I disagree with some of his economics. But generally, I think he's one of the best economists in the world today. Certainly one of the better thinkers in the world today. But he's too conventional. It's sad to say, but too conventionally conservative rather than being a real radical in the Ayn Rand sense. Not enough of a independent thinker completely, right? He still holds on to that religion and tradition and certain aspects of conservatism. But a lot of his work on race and on economics is excellent. Excellent, excellent. All right, guys, I think we're done. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for all the support. We brought in, I don't know, what did we bring in? Anybody do the math? No, nobody's done the math. All right. I think it's, let's do the math. 927, let's call that 930, 950. Yeah, we got $1,000. So yeah, that's really, really, really cool. Thank you, guys. Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate it. Don't forget to press the like button if you like the show before you leave. Don't forget to support the show on YaronBrookShow.com/support, on Patreon or Subscribestar. A lot of people are adding Patreon, which is great. Andrew says, if this Texas abortion law makes it to the Supreme Court, how do you think it will rule? I think they'll knock it down based on this ability to sue I think that's so ridiculous. The Supreme Court will knock it down. I think they'll probably also knock it down because I can't remember how many weeks it is. Is it 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 9 weeks, something like that? I think they've got other abortion laws coming up that they'll be reviewing before, so we'll get some indication of what their thinking is. But I think the Texas law in particular is doomed because it so goes against basic fundamental legal principles. Even if you are anti-abortion, you should be against the Texas law. It's a horrific legal precedent. $300 goes to taxes? Not for me, buddy. Not for me. 4% goes to taxes. All right. I will, well, if you count YouTube but that's not taxes. That's fees for services. All right, everybody. I will talk to you soon. And I don't think I'll do a show Monday. So the next show is probably Saturday. So I'm traveling all the week. I'm doing the debate on Tuesday. I'll be in New York Wednesday, Thursday, and then I'm giving a talk on Friday. So I'm basically going to be gone this week. I might do a show tomorrow, but maybe not. I will, however, be back doing shows on Saturday and Sunday next week. Have a great week, and I'll see you next weekend. Bye, everybody.